welcome back to another video brought to you by HermitCrabAnswers.com. As the title suggests, today we'll be talking about sand and which type of sand is the best for your hermit crab and which types to avoid. Because your pet hermit crab will spend a bulk of its time in sand substrate, it's best for all involved to get it right. This means selecting a safe and comfortable texture of sand. Before we begin, let's take a brief look at this piece of valuable information. Most kinds of sand are safe for hermit crabs. The only exception is calcium sand, otherwise known as Vita sand or reptile sand. This option tends to solidify when exposed to moisture, which can trap or suffocate hermit crabs. To keep your pets safe, try to avoid sand that's extremely fine or bad at retaining water. Good alternatives include all-purpose sand, beach sand, and aquarium sand. We're just about ready to rock and roll, but before we do so, a quick shout out to you, the viewer. None of this would be possible without you, so thanks. We appreciate your time and we certainly value your support. Now let's talk about that sand and the best types to use as the perfect substrate for your hermit crab and which types to avoid. Before we get things right, let's talk about how to make things wrong, which sands to avoid. While hermit crabs can't be harmed by sand itself, they can be harmed by what's in it: chemicals, debris, sharp objects, etc., and in some cases, how the sand responds to moisture. So, that leads us to our first no no, and that is dirty sand. If it looks dirty, feels dirty, it's a no go. The next sand to avoid is sand that's simply too fine. A hermit crab needs to burrow, and sand that is fine will not do the trick. Fine sand can also disrupt airflow, which could harm your hermit crab in a potentially fatal way. And finally, as noted in our introduction, avoid sand that is high in calcium. Sand that is high in calcium isn't good for adding moisture, and it does not support burrowing. Hermit crabs can find themselves in grave danger if they become trapped in calcium rich sand that has been exposed to moisture. So, if the sand is dirty, a bit too fine, and high in calcium, mark it off the list as a potential substrate. You can indeed use regular sand, just as long as it checks off some significant boxes. Regular sand is a good selection as long as it meets the following needs. Number one, sand that facilitates burrowing, just as we've already noted. That's a must. If the sand isn't good for burrowing, then it should be a hard pass. Next on our checklist is water retention. Hermit crabs need moist sand. You know, good sandcastle sand. Hermit crabs love to tunnel. Water retention is therefore a must. And finally, the opposite of dirty sand, yep, clean sand. Regular sand is A-OK just as long as it's clean. Sanitized sand that is void of harmful chemicals is paramount. Also make sure that the packaging has not been tampered with prior to opening. Comb through the sand, just to make sure. So now that you know what to avoid and the important 3-fact checklist when using regular sand, what's the best sand? Well, number one on our list is all-purpose sand. It's the easiest to work with, and let's be honest, it is the cheapest to purchase. Number two is a good one. It's beach sand. As long as it holds a thick texture and is free of debris, then beach sand is a fine selection. As a means of sanitizing, bake the sand. Yes, bake the sand. Wash it under water, dry it, and then bake it in the oven. Although that seems a bit strange, baking will burn off any and all bacteria and pollutants. If you want honest, natural beach sand, then get a bucket and start scooping up at your nearest beach. This can be a fun selection, as long as you work responsibly and make sure it's safe and clean. Our number 3 option is aquarium sand. This is sand that is marketed for aquarium use. The sand is usually sold in a variety of colors, so that can create a cool visual. And finally, option number 4, it's play sand. This is what you'd find in a sandbox. As long as the sand is of a thick texture and the bag it came in has not been tampered, then you're good to go. In many ways, this is quite similar to the aforementioned all-purpose sand. And on that note, that will conclude things for the video portion of our material. But if you want more, what are you waiting for? Head on over to HermitCrabAnswers.com. There you'll find a full-length and incredibly detailed article about this very topic. That article will touch on many of the things we talked about today, but it'll also touch on so much more. So, if you want the next verse of this song dedicated to hermit crabs and sand, please visit hermitcrabanswers.com. And how do you get there? Well, if you're currently viewing us off-site, please click the initial link in the description box below. Said link will take you to all of the sandy goods. And until our paths cross again, and I certainly hope they do, we'd like to thank you once again for joining us today. Please have a wonderful day. All the best to you and yours, and we will talk to you later.